Yep, awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second quarterly CTE Committee Meeting of 2024. We're going to cover a number of topics today. Many of them are should be very familiar with you now. So we're going to talk through, hopefully finalize the IRC policy, and then also talk about the definition of high school level registered apprenticeship and talk about CTE framework. Those will be discussion items, not voting items, just to set expectations. But I'd like to start by thanking our hosts. I really appreciate Charles County Public Schools and specifically North Point High School for hosting us. Many of us had the great pleasure of having a tour here and just incredible work that you all are doing, and we are grateful for your hospitality and great food that these wonderful students prepared for us. So thank you very much. I'd also like to just introduce everyone to our new legal counsel for the Governor's Workforce Development Board, who's with us, Peggy. Yes, she's right behind me here. Glad to have you on board. Thank you for having me here. Okay, before we move on, Molly, do you want to take roll call?
Yep.
Committee members to make sure we have a forum?
Absolutely. So the members we have present in the room are Dr. Boyd, Matt Holloway, Secretary Anderson, Secretary Wu, and Milo Norton. And then virtually we have Superintendent Dr. Carrie Wright and Secretary Rye. And we are anticipating another member to join us virtually soon. So I'll just let everyone know when they join us as well. But we do have a forum.
Great, thank you. So given that we have a quorum, let's start with the easy vote stuff, which is to approve the minutes. All committee members should have received draft minutes in advance of the meeting. Does anyone see anything that needs to be corrected or edited? If not, could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, minutes are approved. Okay. Next, let's jump right into talking about the IRC policy, and just to sort of as a preamble, let's remember what our goals are from the blueprint, right? The basic idea here is we want to make sure that all of our students are on career pathways when they leave high school. And there are a number of components that go into that, but one of the critical pieces here is how do we ensure that 45% of high school graduates complete a registered apprenticeship, high school level registered apprenticeship, or other approved industry recognized credential? What are the definitions around that? How do we set that kind of broad policy in place so that we can then help and support all of our colleagues across the state in terms of implementing that policy? There are multiple components to that definition, and the one that we're going to walk through and hopefully approve today is how we define industry recognized credentials. A lot of work has gone into this, as you all well know. We've had multiple rounds of public comment and feedback, really taken that feedback in and incorporated into this final draft, and then also sort of ran our current list of IRCs through the process as a pressure test to say, okay, if we use this framework and we run our current list through, what ends up being approved on the other side of that, what is left out, do we think that's right? So this has been really a year's worth of work to get to the place that we are now. And I'm going to ask Molly and Richard if they would walk through with us what that kind of final version looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair Norton. Molly Mesner, Deputy Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, CTE Committee.
Richard Kincaid, Senior Executive Director, Office of College and Career Pathways at MSD.
Perfect. And John, I don't know if you can move the sort of, the cube a little bit over, just so we can all see the slides, and I will also share all these slides. So if you can't see anything and it's a little far away, we will also share those afterwards. As Chair Norton pointed out, this has definitely been a long collaborative work process with our friends at MSDE, and really defining the 45% goal and this component of the 45% goal. And really from the beginning, we knew, there couldn't be just a blueprint recognized list and a Maryland State Department of Education recognized list, right? MSDE uses their industry recognized credential list to approve Perkins funding and so forth. And in prior administrations in 10 years, that list was in the range of, I would say, 500 to 600. And this included a lot of what's called TSA, technical skills assessments, and some other pieces. And really the purpose and intent of the blueprint was to make sure students are graduating with, not just an empty credential, something that employers actually recognize and value in the workforce, and that they're really gaining the skills that they need to apply for the job. And so starting last year, we worked with MSDE to really do a deep dive into what's going on across the US and really elevating some of the best practices from other states. A lot of other states are already doing a lot of this work of really kind of fine tuning what are quality industry recognized credentials. And then we kind of backwards and crosswalk that with, the intent of the blueprint and components of the blueprint. So really thinking about, a lot of them, for instance, incorporated the governor's workforce board or a local workforce board in the approval process and so forth. And so, really taking from that, the best practices and kind of putting together our own definition and core criteria and process. And throughout all of this, there's been extensive stakeholder engagement. So you all will recall back at the November meeting, we presented the original draft, which had the original proposed definition along with 10 core criteria. And then after that meeting, we opened it up for a 45-day public comment period and received an overwhelming number of responses. And that really helped us really fine tune, the updated draft version. Actually, John, you can go back one more and I'll get to this in a second. And then we presented, so with that information, we updated the definition and core criteria and, kind of narrowed it down to 7 required criteria and 2 preferred, but not required. And really that was a result of the public feedback. There was one question in particular that said, of these 10 criteria, which ones do you find the most critical and should be required? And that really helped inform us. And really the 2 that became preferred but not required, it was just because public feedback pointed out that stackable and renewable is not going to be the case for every single valuable credential. And then we removed one, it was quality assurance. And that was really, again, due to public feedback kind of noting that the components of quality assurance were already embedded in some of these other core criteria. So we presented that updated draft to you all at our February meeting, and then we opened that up for a second round of public feedback. And so we had, another round of stakeholder engagement and, throughout all of this, kind of taking that and reiterating the process. So what you have before you is the updated policy as a result of that. The updated approved list of industry recognized credentials that meet the definition and updates to the process. And throughout all of this, Richard, myself, Rachel, we've been trying to stress that this is really a phased approach, right? Things are not going to change overnight. And so, with that, and especially understanding with the local education agencies and school districts, that they're backwards mapping and planning for the upcoming school year, that this list, really can't go into effect until the 25-26 school year in order to give everyone, time to bring in these industry recognized credentials into their programming. Next slide. So this one goes into sort of stakeholder feedback that we got, and collectively over the 2 public feedback periods, we had 160 responses to our survey, and that is a lot. You'll see here, it's a little small up there, but I'll break it down for you. So 41% of respondents were the LEAs, so someone working at a local school district. A good other, probably out of 30% represented more like the business side. So you've had industry associations, you had local workforce boards, and employers responding. And then about 20% from the post-secondary, 6% from state agencies, and then 1.2% of the nonprofit or the other realm. So a pretty vast and wide amount of feedback. And really from this, so again, 160 respondents, and that's not even including, collectively, we probably gave, I don't even know, couple dozen presentations to various stakeholder groups, community colleges, local workforce boards. Richard today just did one to the chief academic officers, obviously local school districts and so forth. So we've really been workshopping and socializing everything a lot as well. And obviously during those processes, we get a lot of feedback as well. So really taking all that feedback and then analyzing it and really kind of trying to, thematically code, okay, these are recurring issues that keep coming up and we really do need to kind of consider them because it is something that people keep saying. And really being thoughtful throughout that whole process. Next slide. All right, so the document before you goes into this section, which basically just explains the scope of what this definition applies to. So presently, that is really the CTE Committee's recognition of what counts towards the 45% goal. And then on MSDE sides for Perkins funding. And I don't know, Richard, I know later you're talking about Perkins. I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit here or if you want to talk about that later.
Yeah, so the Perkins element here is really programmatic more than the funding component. Programmatically, high quality CTE programming must include a series of courses that build in depth and complexity over time, connected to post-secondary credit, industry recognized credentials, work-based learning experiences that run on a continuum. That's really the foundation of Perkins. And so we're building on that work to then expand it to the entirety of the incident blueprint.
Great. And then this bottom piece here is sort of more in our recommendation section, but a future consideration that this quality criteria could maybe be applied in other spaces outside of just MSD Perkins and the blueprint. And really thinking about, are there other industry recognized credential state lists where, this definition criteria could also be applied. And so those are conversations that Rachel and I have been exploring, with some of our colleagues. And so that's kind of been the future coming attractions, as it were. Next slide. All right, so there before you is the definition of industry recognized credentials. I know in the past few presentations, I've read this out loud to you all, but I will be honest, it hasn't changed too much since the last time you saw it. We kind of just played around and tweaked a couple words just to make things flow a little bit. But from that second round of public feedback, there really wasn't very much to kind of tweak with this when it comes to the meaning of it. So you'll see that before you. And basically what we did is kind of taking that definition and then breaking it out into, okay, these are the required criteria. So you can go to the next slide. All right, that is very small, and I do apologize. It is in page
7.
Yep, page 7 in your attachment. And so, before I turn it over to Richard to kind of walk us through the specific criteria, I'll just highlight a few things from public feedback. So in this first criteria here aligns with in-demand occupations. We heard a lot about how there's a difference between the statewide in-demand occupations and what is really a regional and local need. And so, again, we kind of just added language recognizing that there is a regional, local in-demand occupations, and that can be identified by the local workforce development board. And then we also added wording around, emerging industries as well. And then provides documented outcomes. The primary piece here is kind of moving that up and elevating that, because the whole point of what we're doing here is that individuals go on and have outcomes that can be documented. But we also recognize that there are limitations with this, right? There are in emerging industries, for instance, you might not have data to show, okay, this is where the student's ending up and this is what they're earning and so forth. So you might not be able to do it there. And so that's kind of like a sub bullet underneath that one. And then additionally, when it comes to earning a living sustaining wage, there are valuable credentials that maybe only start at minimum wage. So you think of, today we saw the child development. So your CDA, they might be starting only at minimum wage. And so there might not be, that family sustaining wage piece of it, but that is still meeting number one, it is an in-demand occupation, right? Or you think about your home health aides. So kind of just moving, we had that as a footnote previously, but now making it as a sub-bullet because that was still something that people were struggling to understand, that that's kind of a component of that. So Richard, I'll let you kind of walk through the criteria and maybe talk a little bit, because we have talked about these a couple times, but also just sort of how you actually assess them per criteria, because that is one place you'll see later in our recommendations that we recognize that we do have to have a public facing document for anyone who wants to get into the weeds of like, okay, how did you actually, what were you looking up, like what labor market data for assessing each criteria, and so that's something that's in the works to release publicly as well, but you know, you can touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of important, like off the top notes on this. First, I want to reiterate time and time again that the listing of IRCs that was developed based on this criteria does not go live until July 1st of 2025, right? So we are 14 months away from this moving forward. The reason why is we want to make sure that the listing that we develop based on this criteria is actually the criteria and the listing that we need to support our programs. Additionally, many of the industry recognized credentials that are on this list are using statewide data. We know that there's county and regional variance where there may be industry recognized credentials in other parts of the state that didn't, percolate up when we were looking at the statewide data, right? And so we're providing an opportunity for additional IRCs to be considered by this committee, and that process will open, I believe it's in August. And so that's when we'll get really nuanced of any IRCs that do meet this criteria but might be at a more regional level. So I just want to level set that. This isn't happening, in August, and there is an opportunity to continue to look at and reflect on this living document. With that said, the two criteria that Molly began working through, aligning with in-demand occupations. We did a quick survey around with our local workforce boards, and by and large, the majority of them use LifeCast labor market information as their foundational information for labor market. And so one of the first things that my team then did is we procured licenses with LifeCast so that we were looking at the same data, not only of statewide need, but also job postings, its robust data set that we're able to look at. And so that's where the initial alignment with in-demand occupations happened, right? And so just looking at that initial data set. Then working through a number of processes, we were able to evaluate those that felt like maybe they were on the fringe, or maybe we weren't quite sure if it would meet. And so reached out to local workforce boards, workforce associations, any number of organizations to say, can you help us with this, right? We have some questions. On providing documented outcomes, this is really a step that's new for us, right? So oftentimes we'll hear folks say, this industry recognized credential does provide preference for a student in the workforce. And our follow-up question is, well, how do you know? Right? Just because you say it does, like, how do we know that it actually does that? And so moving forward, this is one of those data sets that we're going to begin looking at to say, show us the verifiable evidence. Like if we're adding this to the list, are you actually hiring students with this credential, right? And so that'll be a partnership that we need to lean into with our friends, at Labor and Commerce and our workforce boards and others to make sure that we are connecting the data to the specific criteria, right? This is our baseline year. We can move forward from here. With regard to the last two, validated by industry and assessment based. So validated by industry means that an industry organization, a lot of times for these industry credentials, these are vetted by labor unions. They're vetted by workforce associations, trade associations. In some cases, particularly in IT, these are industry credentials that are developed by companies like Cisco for their proprietary products, or Amazon Web Services, right? And so through that validation process, we want to make sure that it is tied very cleanly to the skills that are necessary in a particular industry. What we're not looking for are these sort of fluff industry credentials that are almost like merit badges, like you have completed a course, like here is your merit badge of completion, right? That doesn't give preference, and it's certainly not validated by the industry as a whole. And so that's really where we saw a lot of our credentials fall off of that larger list that we've been using. The next piece is we want to make sure that it's assessment based, and this can take several different forms. A lot of industry recognized credentials will be both knowledge and skills based. You particularly see this in the world of licenses. But we need it to be at least one of the two. And so we want to see that the skills are deeply connected to, the things that are being asked on the assessment are deeply connected to the knowledge that a student needs to have in order to go into the industry, and or they can demonstrate the skills necessary in order to move into that particular job function. Next slide, please. For standards driven, this is multifaceted. We really look at this across two different areas. The first, we want to make sure that the industry credential is aligned to the standards of the actual occupation. And so what specific outcomes or what specific things would an employer require a student to know or perform if they are in a particular position? Backward mapping that then to does the industry recognized credential assessment actually measure proficiency on those particular items? So that's on the industry side. Took it a little bit of a step further and said, are these standards also being mapped into our CTE programs? So what level of assurance do we have that if a student is moving through a particular program of study, that they will be successfully learning the knowledge and skills related to this industry credential, right? And that's where we have some work to do, right? The next one, attainable and accessible. There are some industry recognized credentials that you can't earn until you're 18 or 21. So you're bound by age. Some of them you're bound by a particular degree. And so we wanted to make sure that since this list is for high school students, the items on this listing are attainable by high school students. On the accessibility component, my team is working to put together a resource for LEAs so that LEAs, as they're going through and thinking about programs of study that they want to develop or enhance with these IRCs, they understand the accommodations and modifications that may or may not be available within these particular industry credentials. These are industry grade. By and large, there are not many modifications or resources to help out kiddos. On a lot of them, the best they'll do is translate into several different languages, right? But additional time, support, reduced like multiple choice answers, like none of those things generally exist. On the portability, this is where we want to make sure that not only is the credential, and this, will play a role in some of these regional credentials. We want to make sure that a student is able to move and still have value within that IRC. So we look at that within the state, but we also look at it within the DMV region, right? And so our bordering states, making sure that if we're providing a credential, it is of value to that student, even if that value may not be directly related to Maryland, although we hope they stay. The final two, 8 and 9, these are optional components. So you'll remember when we put the first listing out, we had 10 criteria. We now have 9, and then 2 of those became optional. They're things that we would like to see, but it's not a requirement in order to implement. The first, we want to make sure that they're stackable. And so in this particular area, can they be transferred for post-secondary credit or hours? Can they count for hours within registered apprenticeship programs? Can they show like progressive skill attainment over time? So, is it one of a series of credentials that you can then earn? See this a lot in like IT. CompTIA has probably the ones that come to my mind first, of how those credentials are really stackable to then move the student into like cybersecurity or the hardware, network component of the shop. And then last, renewable. One of the things that we saw in the states that we examined was, a reliance that these are renewable IRCs over time. So it's not something that you're gonna earn at as 17-year-old, right? And then never have to retest to show that you have kept up with the pace. So we would like to see that a student is needing to retest at a certain interval to show that they are keeping up with the knowledge and skills necessary within the industry. And so that became an optional element.
All right, and then this next section was something new that we added to this updated draft, and it's really around defining what does completion mean, right? That's a key component there within what's written in the blueprint. And so number one, you'll see basically, as Richard talked about, you take an assessment and you're awarded the industry recognized credential, right? Pretty straightforward and so forth, but even that, you know, before they graduate high school, even that has a little bit of nuances that we still have to flush out, because you think about some of them, like a pharmacy technician, which has an 18-year-old cutoff. So if you're young for your high school grade, then is there something there where after they graduate, but over the summer, we can still collect that data, and so it still incorporate them in. So that is, you know, more guidance to come with that, but first one is you take the credential assessment and you're awarded the credential. The second definition here, you know, also came up as a result of a lot of public feedback and really had us considering, you know, when the college degree in and of itself is that occupation's credential. So what we mean by this is like an engineering degree, your teaching degree. And this is not Molly taking AP US history and then going on and getting my Bachelor of Arts and majoring in history. Okay, this is not that. This is really where there is, you know, the 2 or 4 year degree is that occupational credential. And so within our recommendations, it's basically, you know, when we work with MSDE and then the Maryland Higher Education Commission, MEC, to put together guidance around being really, really clear and definite on what are the guardrails for something to count in this. It can't just be, yeah, Rachel, jump in.
No, to that point, I think one important piece to this, by you know, reading this
Yes.
for members to understand is part of that guidance will be it fits the industry recognized credential criteria here, so it can kind of demonstrate all of those other components we walked through, those seven required criteria.
Yeah.
At a minimum, that would be incorporated into their guidance.
Absolutely. So it's going to have to be, you know, very, very specific and prescriptive. And so we'll be working with them to develop that over the coming months. And then along those lines, you know, again, also recognizing something that would meet our industry recognized credential, the 7 core and 2 preferred, is, you know, another piece of public feedback that came up was around pre-apprenticeship. So there are a lot of like registered apprenticeship sponsors who have already worked with school districts to build these quality pre-apprenticeship programs. And, you know, there was kind of a sense of almost like, are we taking a step backwards in not considering these quality pre-apprenticeship programs? You know, but in discussion with Division of Workforce Development Adult Learning in Maryland Department of Labor, which is the state approving agency for apprenticeships, you know, pre-apprenticeship is not a registered apprenticeship, so it really doesn't fit under the apprenticeship definition. But the pre-apprenticeships, a lot of them can meet these quality criteria that we've outlined here. And so sort of part of that, one of our recommendations is that the Division of Workforce Development Adult Learning, you know, work with the other partners such as Maryland Apprenticeship Training Council, MATSE, ourselves, and so forth, in really defining, okay, how could you approve a pre-apprenticeship program so that, you know, that's showing that by the student completing that, they've met our core criteria. And, you know, oftentimes these are programs where they then articulate into a registered apprenticeship. So
No,
I want to add to that.
I did want to touch on that point in particular. When we talk about quality pre-apprenticeships, they're designed to provide a student maybe doesn't have some basic skills or knowledge necessary to qualify for selection into a registered apprenticeship to be able to take that step, hopefully after they've completed their their pre-apprenticeship, excuse me. So for students who say aren't ready to start a registered apprenticeship in 11th grade, contribute to that part of the 45% goal. Many, as Molly indicated, programs who kind of operate pre-apprenticeships that translate into their registered apprenticeships recommended this path as we're trying to figure out the right way to account for that pathway that certainly gets a student on that career pathway when they graduate, but in a way that didn't cleanly fit in the text.
How many of those step programs do you think there are?
So we try, so pre-apprenticeships, since they're not registered registered, they're not all tracked. So basically, department, right now, we're track ones that apply for grants in order to be approved. So, you know, I cannot project. I don't think it's very many, but I do think, obviously, we did hear from quite a few registered apprenticeship sponsors kind of indicating, hey, we've got these really good quality programs that we've put a lot of time and we work with the school districts, we've built curriculum around. So I think there's a few, but I can't imagine it's many.
And just for my
Yeah.
knowledge, are those are employers, sponsors are employers?
Mhm.
So in my view, if an employer is saying this is a pipeline for us to hire students, that's the thing I think we want to make sure is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Blues Peer apprenticeships, similar to item number 2, would have to still kind of meet the 7 criteria, would have to be able to demonstrate those connections. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this one? Also, I don't have a slide on this, but one component you'll see in your draft before you was just sort of a recognition, some of the feedback we continue to hear is, okay, but what about the CTE programs to study that don't have any industry recognized credential? So, I know we've talked to Mr. Holloway a lot about the ag industry in particular about that. And, so within the draft, we kind of just acknowledge that, look, there are going to be CTE programs of study that don't have an industry recognized credential, and that's okay. And it's just kind of bulleting out a few components there. 45% is not 100%, right? It's okay for a student to be in the 55%. Also just a recognition that, it doesn't have to just be students in CTE programs of study. The blueprint is written so that it's all high school graduates. And so really thinking about your dual enrollment students as well. And then finally, the purpose and intent of the blueprint is really that the majority of this 45% should eventually be the high school level of registered apprenticeship. So for those CTE programs of study that just there is no industry recognized credential, really lean into the apprenticeship opportunities there and really start building that out. And so that's kind of just why that's there, because it is something we kept hearing and it just felt important to kind of reiterate. Next slide. All right, these are the recommendations. We've already talked about number 1 and number 2, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The third recommendation here is, just again, sort of acknowledgement that this is a policy document. This is not how do you actually implement this, right? And so just recognizing, working with MSDE on providing implementation guidance and materials, especially in supporting local school districts on actually implementing this. So, more fleshed out guidance, talking about grading of funding. How do you actually pay for the credential exams? Thinking about the data implications here as well, and just providing more, how to operationalize this. The business rules is again touching on anyone who really wants to break down, okay, how is each criteria actually assessed? And then a program of study crosswalk, which programs of study have this industry recognized credential. And Richard, you can talk on, I know in DC, you had developed these one-pagers on some of the more like in-demand credentials and kind of just a marketing material for students, parents, caregivers to really understand, or career coaches to really understand, okay, what does this credential actually do? And so those are all pieces that we've been kind of in development and working closely with MSDE on, and those will kind of come in the year ahead. Next slide.
Oh, yeah, I am, this is obviously sort of the heart of it is like figuring out, there's some that fit easily into the bucket and like trying to figure out where is that point where a high school student has clearly achieved something, but it may only be one first step, in a longer pathway, and ideally that's what it will be, right? Because we want these students to continue along that career pathway and attain those additional credentials, move into that profession. I'm just sort of curious, and for those who are closer to the school system, I didn't know if there was any additional color or context you could give us around, sort of how you think this will go for the schools in terms of like making these determinations, because I know this is some of the difficulty, and I appreciate all the hard work that our colleagues at MSDE have already put into this, but those of you from LEAs or working every day with LEAs, I'm sort of curious as to what you think about how this is going to play.
Rebecca, I don't know about we can put you on the spot. We have like workshopped a little bit with LEA CTE directors, and you know, I know Richard even had some look over the updated list, and there was, you know, thumbs up remarks, but Rebecca, I don't know if you can kind of speak to this at all, because I think it's really important, like, you guys are the ones who actually have to implement this and operationalize it, and so it's really important for CTE committee members to know, you know, how you all are feeling.
So, yeah, I think that I love that there is the element of, the college credits or the, you know, getting on that pathway, because I think that that was one thing that we were screaming from the rooftops, that not every, program that they're partaking in high school is going to be an industry recognized credential, or is that industry recognized credential the most meaningful next step for every individual student? So if they're going to continue on, we want to make sure we're helping them on that pathway, whatever their pathway is going to be. So being able to differentiate in that way, I think is really, really substantial. I think, yes, the definition of it, I think that the meaning in hearing this conversation makes a lot of sense, to not just say, oh, no, that's gonna get you, you know, whatever, check that box, but to really put the meat behind what that course specifically looks like, and it's gonna pertain to that it is equitable to what we're talking about with this industry recognized credential. It's getting you down that path, it's getting you a step closer. That's the ultimate goal. So I think defining that is gonna take a moment. I think that it's gonna, because it will definitely, we know how every LEA is different in courses and outcomes and content and curriculum. So I think it's gonna take a moment to define that, to make sure that it doesn't lose its meaning and we start to get watered down. But I think that the intent of it is substantial and in the right direction. So I think that's great.
Yeah, that was the question that comes to my mind, just for us to ask ourselves is, just to make sure we're not creating actually more confusion or a bigger loophole here. That is counter to what we're actually trying to accomplish. You know what I mean?
And so it sounds, if I kind of heard some of that feedback correctly, I think it's kind of to the point that the implementation, kind of the very specific implementation guidance and some of that technical assistance that's going to be needed over the course of not just the coming year before this definition list goes into effect, but even after that point, that's going to be even more important really than setting up this policy in the first place, if I'm kind of hearing that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think also as we dive in further to looking at the standards within the CTE pathways and things like that, it might flush out pretty concretely as those guidelines become more concrete, because they kind of go. So, but yeah, there will need to be support.
Well, even walking through the tour today, I think I can see some programs, I'm like, that's easy, you know, this is already, fits all, you know, checks all these boxes, it's gonna be pretty simple, than others where it might be a little more complicated.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Next slide. All right, this is in there, so we won't really go into detail about it. Richard, I don't know if you want to touch on the application process at all, but you know, long story short, we recognize that the list before you is not, you know, set in stone. There is an opportunity for credentials that aren't on that list to be considered and assessed against criteria, especially when it comes to something that may just be a local regional need. And so that application window will open up August 1st through October 31st. What else do you want to say?
Yeah, as part of the packet that was made available around the IRC process, there is a link to the application of what that looks like. Our goal here is to collect all of the information that we need, but be as lightweight as possible, so that we can really get a good understanding and make some good solid determinations. So that'll open in August. It'll close on October 31st. And this is an opportunity for anybody who wants to recommend an IRC to do so. My team at MSD will then take the criteria that this committee approves, we'll run it through the process, and then we'll make a recommendation, either approve or not approve. So we'll just sort of accumulate all of that stuff and then push it forward to this committee. in the January meeting of every year. For you all to take a look at, and on some of them, maybe MSD got it right, maybe, on some we didn't. And, you'll have an opportunity to either vote to approve or not approve the inclusion of those IRCs. We also want to make sure that we don't get into the place that we just came from, where we have a list that's entirely bloated, no longer related to our programs. That, we need to make sure that the list stays current also. So we'll have a biennial review process that'll happen every August to November. We're considering this first iteration to be done, so 2 years from now, we'll have an opportunity to take a look at all of the IRCs on the list, run them through the same evaluative process, and then make that proposal to you all to make sure we're staying current.
Have you had any feedback from any groups that are definitely gonna go down this path of trying to create a new?
There are a few, and in fact, some actually come from the ag community, and so there are a number of credentials that percolated up through Terry Shank on my team, through Mate, through others, that didn't meet the statewide criteria, but we know probably meets the more nuanced regional criteria. And so, thank them for pushing those forward, but also said, in August, this is your time to shine. Push out the information, we'll reevaluate, and that'll be on the agenda in January.
All right, next slide. I think we're wrapping up here, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we had Sharnetta Young join, and then Michael Thomas is calling in, so those two members are online as well. And so we've kind of gone through this, right? You will have an application window. There is an approved list attached to this as an appendix of about, I think, 210 approved credentials. And then, potentially reviewing some additional credentials that'll be applied for, and then ongoing review, and then of course the guidance and the implication of how to actually operationalize that. So that wraps up the industry recognized credential policy for you. And before I turn it over to Myra, I just wanted to open it up again if there's any other questions that have come up from you all.
Or any concerns about
Yes.
this before, basically the next steps would be if we feel good about this, we would vote to approve it here. And then this would go, we've been working in collaboration with the AID on the drafting of this, but they should take a final pass through. I think I personally would ask them to take a keen eye on, let's make sure they don't feel like we've created any loophole or any situation where, there may be some feedback there that and then once any changes that get made there will be made. Once it's approved, then we'll work to disseminate this to all the folks.
What's the timeframe on their approval process?
Yeah, so what's that?
When their next public.
Their public meetings are monthly. They just had one last week. So there's probably one June 20th. And then, but over that time, we can work with their staff, kind of send this over, and try to get some feedback that way as well. So their timeline is kind of iterative of what we present for them. We'll get into it later. We do have an implementation plan coming up. And so, it would be really nice if these things are all wrapped up and finalized and can be part of our implementation plan. So that, to the next steps, we can put together the guidance, how to actually operationalize everything.
And I'll just add to that quickly, just in case for any members of the viewing public or members of the committee, that might be a little confusing. The Accountability Implementation Board does oversee all the Blueprint implementation work, including work done by this committee. So that's kind of a standard, what Myra just described as kind of the standard, any policies we pass, the AIB does have an opportunity to kind of review, take up, say, hey, we think you maybe need to reconsider X, Y, and Z, or this looks good. So that's kind of a standard part of the process here.
Any concerns or discussion that we need to have this in the meeting? Okay, good. Feel good about this? Okay, then if we feel good about moving to the next step, I will make the motion to vote that we adopt this IRC policy to send on AIP for review. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Nay?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great, that was Dr. Wright and Sharnetta Young.
Awesome, thank you very much. Okay, any opposed? Right, hearing no opposition, the policy is approved. For the AIB, so thank you. Great, okay, the next part of the meeting is to talk about the formulation of the CTE framework for the state of Maryland. That is another one of the tasks that has been given to our committee. And the idea here is to develop a statewide framework for career and technical education that prepares students for employment in a diverse and modern economy. We started working on this, really CTE committee staff have been working diligently on this with MSDE and with Advanced CTE to develop this draft framework that we're going to walk through today. I'll just give you a little bit of a preview. There's been, we've gone through multiple rounds of getting some initial feedback. We're going to highlight, there's a couple of things that we already identify we need to kind of change some of the language on. You're going to see there are 6 priorities in the framework. We think 2 of them need to be wordsmithed a little bit to really think about this question of tying CTE programs to study to the RTI registered apprenticeship and or supporting the attainment of IRCs. I think we need to be a little bit clearer in the language there, so we'll talk about that. But we thought it would be good to walk through the framework as it sits now, get everyone's thoughts and feedback, and then iterate, we take that, incorporate that feedback, and then work very collaboratively again with the AIB to kind of get the final version of this ready to go. The other thing I just want to say is this framework is that it's a visionary document, right? So this is not getting into the nuts and bolts of how you implement each of these priorities. I think it's critical that we get the priorities right because everything's going to flow from that. And if we set the right priorities, then the implementation that follows, we can be sure that it's lined up with the vision that everyone agrees to and that aligns to the law. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly to walk us through the framework as it exists.
Great, thank you so much, Chair Norton. And I know I'm just kind of looking at the time, so Latifah and I will be moving, somewhat quickly through the priorities and strategies, just because we want to make sure we wrap up when we need to. But obviously, if we don't touch on something today, please just send us feedback. As Myra already said, we are still, editing and tweaking things. So as we go through it, we'll kind of just walk you all through, the updated version. Next slide. All right, so as Myra touched on, we've been working with Advanced CTE and MSDE to really, build out this framework, starting in the beginning of the year. And, really did a landscape analysis of strategic plans, CTE state plans and so forth of many other states, and kind of, percolating from that, what are recurring themes that overlap with the blueprint? And how can we kind of use some of the strategic communication plans that were already out there? And really taking that. So from that, I think we originally drafted maybe 4 or 5 priorities, and then it's kind of, through development and so forth, has expanded to 6. And then we've also had a couple of rounds of stakeholder input. So we did a workshop with CTE committee members and designees to kind of fine tune some pieces. And then we also held 3 focus groups, one with local school districts, one with community colleges, and then one sort of with employers. It was employers and workforce board representatives to really get their feedback as well. And then additionally, we've also done several one-on-one sort of interviews with key stakeholders. Next slide. So we're going to walk through each priority as well as a couple of the strategies within each one. So just, at the end of each one, just feel free to jump in or ask questions as we go through them. So the first priority here is really around the college and career readiness standard, which is in the blueprint. And if you go into the glossary, there's a visual for what the CCR standard is, so you can kind of reference that there. But basically, the blueprint requires the Maryland State Board of Education to set a college and career readiness standard. And the state board has recently adopted that standard. It is a 3.0 GPA plus a B or C in Algebra 1 or proficient, I think, in the MCAT, which is an algebra test. And Superintendent Wright or Bridger can probably speak to it better than I can. But it's a big component of the blueprint that all of our students should be college and career ready and go on. And so this is really about supporting, maximizing the number of students who are college and career ready, and then ensuring that all of our students have the opportunities and support necessary to meet that. And that's both the before they're in 10th grade, which is kind of when they're assessed for college and career readiness, and then also afterwards. So those that don't meet the CCR standard, how can we support them? Next slide.
Before you move on from that, I think one thing to note on this is that while not all of this happens within the CTE system per se, we felt it, you know, and this is of course open to feedback, but as we were workshopping this, it seemed important to start here and include this because the sort of passing the standard by 10th grade in the blueprint is kind of the avenue through which students can then access things like a registered apprenticeship pathway, for example, some of the other things that this committee does deal with that are kind of part of the future of the CTE system and framework. So that's kind of why we felt it important to kind of start here.
Yep, absolutely. And that was kind of sort of the framing of it, is kind of starting big and you know, kind of going down to the priorities. Next slide. So the first strategy here is really just, you know, using data to make data-driven decisions around, you know, access and equity. The second piece here is the educator recruitment part and retention, which is really important, and just making sure that it's a, you know, diverse workforce. The third component here is, you know, kind of getting more into the CCR assessment. So what this one here is speaking about is there are instances where a student might be really engaged in CTE, and that might be the thing that kind of gets them engaged in their academics. So what I mean by that is, you know, we've done several focus groups now on our expert review teams, pilot visits. And, you know, what we hear from students is honestly that it wasn't until they started their CTE that they were really into school. And what I mean by that, we'll literally hear them say, I don't talk at my home school. I don't ask questions. Like here, I meet with my, you know, instructor afterwards. I ask questions, and they're really engaged in the process. And, you know, one component we've been talking about is, would there be a way where a CTE course could maybe help reassess that student for CCR? So what we mean by that is, let's say, okay, so you didn't get an A, B, or C in algebra, right? And maybe you just weren't engaged with the instructor and so forth, but you're in your construction course and you like finally understand math because you're actually applying that to the real world. So is there a place where there's maybe a construction math where a student's really understanding, okay, how do I measure and divide and make sure we've got all the resources and so forth? And so kind of using that as maybe an opportunity to reassess the student and meet that CCR standard. Do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, and so, you know, in our core content areas, MSD has been convening a number of work groups, and particularly in math, there's a presentation around math and literacy this morning to chief academic officers showing new, for example, math pathways that align to various occupations that a student may want to go into. So, you know, once you do your foundational math, right, the things that Maryland and others in post-secondary have deemed important, like Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, beyond that, what sort of math or computational thinking could a student become involved or enrolled in that then provides some of those supports and additional elements when they move into their career connected learning? And so, you know, that component is exciting. It's, you know, really thinking about how you can contextualize the theoretical things that we're talking about right now. And it opens up a whole new world of possibility for kids. So love exactly, you know, what Molly had just said, and certainly, you know, would encourage you to lean into some of that new and exciting work happening through these work groups with MSD as well.
I have a question about that. Seeing that this is wonderful because not all students will be CCR, right? By the 10th grade, and we have to have support pathways for them. So I'm just curious, did that committee speak to what that assessment might look like? And is it on a sliding scale to ensure that these students are indeed CCR? Does it look like school-based? Does it look like something created from MSDE? What are we using to be able to gauge that that student is prepared?
Yeah, so right now the definition is developed by the State Board of Education, right? And so the CCR standard that you see was passed by, them in early January. Is it complete? Maybe, maybe not, right? And so, I think it's a starting point for, how we assess the current system. And then through groups like this, really thinking about, are we getting at the heart of college and career readiness? And how do we measure that? Because they are two adjacent components, right? And so, I think that we continue having some of these conversations and, at some point, perhaps they become elevated.
Yeah, and if you actually go to the next slide, in the strategy number 6, it kind of speaks to that, right? Maybe potentially working with the state board and the AIB and other relevant agencies on whether the current CCR standard is appropriate for the career ready component of that. Chair Norton, I know you kind of spoke about this recently on a meeting, and I don't know if you want to expand upon that.
Well, yeah, I've actually, Superintendent Navarro said this early before our tour. She made this exact point to say we need to think about expanding the definition of career readiness. What does that mean? And having been a math teacher myself, it's a great example of there are students who maybe when they see the word problem on the page, it's frightening, but when they're tactically solving a problem with their hands, they can do the exact same thing. They can actually solve the problem just because they're not writing it down on a piece of paper. And so I am not by any means, pedagogy and assessment, all that is not my area of expertise, but I've just seen that in the classroom. And so thinking about what we mean by career ready.
Any other questions on this priority? All right, the next one. All right, priority number 2, this is really around the career counseling component of the blueprint. Before our public meeting, we heard from a few of the career counselors here. And basically, here I just want to point out we're using the term career coaching. That's really a nod to, the 24 school districts and 13 local boards and 15 community colleges all are implementing this a little differently, but a lot of them are calling them career coaches. And that's really just to sort of distinguish them from what was your traditional guidance counselor. So, basically all students participate in high quality expert career coaching, starting in middle grades and continuing through high school. Next slide. So this first strategy here is talking about developing a high quality career coaching framework. And I think earlier today, again, when we heard from the career counselors, it was really, they are looking for some sort of scope and sequence to really define and outline what they're doing. And also really defining the roles and responsibilities of the different partners in all of this. So that would be sort of strategy 1 underneath this. Strategy 2 is really just talking about expanding career exposure, really starting in elementary and middle grades. And, one component I'll point out here is on the 3rd line, you'll see career connected learning opportunities. Now, originally, we were using work-based learning opportunities. That's a really typical term among the CTE educator space. However, in our focus group with employers and some of our one-on-one discussions, for anyone not in that space, if you read elementary and work-based learning, it's a little bit like, wait, my 2nd grader is going to be working in a workplace on a job site. It's a little jarring. And so, there are some other states that have moved towards this sort of career connected learning continuum. And so you'll see that wording kind of incorporated throughout and kind of just thinking about it more in that sense. And it's not, work-based learning is not just you're going into a work site.
The definition. For this among many other terms.
Sorry.
In the glossary, sorry. If you're interested.
Yep, and a lot of these definitions, of course, again, are also welcome to feedback and input from you all and edits, since we are, kind of creating some of these things as we go. And then this bullet here is really just talking on really engaging the family and so forth, especially when you're talking about younger students. Some of the feedback we got is, just parents being a little uncomfortable about, you talking to someone, talking to my 2nd grader about, welding or something. And so just really kind of thinking through how do we engage families more. Next slide. Again, this is talking to that sort of living document when it comes to career counseling, something that's really going with the student and being, updated and so forth, when they're receiving career counseling services. And the fourth one there is really around, professional development, but also kind of supporting, students' flexibility. So, what we mean by that is their opportunity to explore different careers, right? They might go down one path, realize it's not for them. How does that career counselor sort of shift gears and get them, the support they need to think about other career pathways? And then this bottom piece here, the number 5, is really around the students who have not met that CCR standard, and how does career counseling look different for them? And what kind of specialized services will that require? Any questions on priority 2?
We keep saying questions, but of course.
Yes, or feedback or thoughts,
Yes.
yes. Anything jumping out?
I would just say this is what I am getting at when I say this is a framework, like where the rubber hits
Yes.
the road is gonna be, okay, how do you ensure that every school has high quality, experts? But if we get the language right, then we know what we're shooting for, and we have to figure out how we.
Exactly, it's really taking this, once this is perfected, it's really taking this and then outlining, okay, who's responsible for this? How do we actually implement and operationalize this? Yeah.
A comment, and I'm looking to read to on this,
Mhm.
I hadn't really focused on the career connected learning language before with the work-based. I mean, but work-based learning still has a place in the world, and it's just part of the broader definition, obviously, it's a bigger subject.
Yes, exactly. Work-based learning can be one component of
component of
learning
the career.
continuum. Yes,
Mhm.
well said.
Exactly.
It was mainly just the idea that some of this actually won't happen in the workplace.
Right,
You're
some of this-
probably not taking a
some of it's
second
not
grader
workplace, yeah.
to, the honor.
You need both,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, next slide. Latif?
Sure. So as Molly's already explained and Secretary, when you kind of expanded upon, we've shifted the language a bit to focus on career connected learning and the importance of making sure that all students have access to career connected learning and exploration opportunities starting in the middle grades or even earlier. And I think for those of us who were here for the conversation with the career coaches that are here in Charles County, they really exemplified and demonstrated what that can look like. But we want to actually provide more guidance and support to our local districts around what that can look like. And so one is developing a continuum of career connected learning around career exposure, career exploration, career preparation, and that leads up and including registered apprenticeship. And I think we even heard earlier today about some of the things that they've already started to do, right? Some of the career interest assessments and some of the field trips that they're taking. But what should be happening? What's the scope and sequence for that? When should certain activities be happening and what grade? And providing more comprehensive approach for the entire state so that the expectations are more clear. I think we heard from one of the career coaches saying like, we'd like a little more clarity.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the areas, while this is not clear, this says that we're gonna get clear. Right? So we're gonna provide you all with some more clarity around that scope and sequencing. We're also talking about how we can redesign the career preparation pathways and CTE to incorporate registered apprenticeship as well and align that instruction under 3.3. Sorry, we can go to the next one. Also, how are we going to engage our employer partners and engage the full community in this work of career connected learning? While the teachers here are doing a great job and the coaches are doing a great job in all of our LEAs and all of our jurisdictions across the state, they actually need it to be a community effort. And so that's what this is referring to here in 3.3, making sure that we have not only our employers, but our nonprofits, our apprenticeship sponsors, everyone working to make sure our young people get access to career connected learning. And then also providing some scaffolding support to get there. And so what does it look like for the local workforce development board and the community colleges and the LEAs to do this work and making sure that we're giving everyone the support they need to be able to support our young people. And then 3.5 is we need to make it easy. We need to make it easy particularly for our employers to work with our students. And so working with the appropriate offices and departments to make sure that we are streamlining the registered apprenticeship process so that our employers are able to get access to the talent they need and that our young people are able to get access to the work experiences they need to be successful. I'll pause here for questions or for comments or feedback on number 3 before we talk about number 4.
one thing I'll note on 3.5, and we're, when we get to, especially in, one of our future meetings, digging into our apprenticeship policy more. Just want to note, and I think many know this, but for the public or for some committee members less familiar with the registered apprenticeship space. Registered apprenticeship entails set of federal requirements for registering. Those of course are out of our hands, so some of the process is in a sense out of Maryland's hands. Maryland does have a state apprenticeship agency in the Maryland Department of Labor that approves, it registers at a state level as well, kind of provides some additional kind of oversight in addition to employer and sponsor support. And that team has really expanded dramatically recently. So in 2016, when apprenticeship and the agency kind of came into the Department of Labor, there were like 2 staff or something like that. Then it grew to 12. And as of a couple of months ago, it's expanded to 30 or 32? 32. And so that I think really reflects the level of commitment to sort of supporting a process that's really smooth and seamless to the extent the state kind of has that within its jurisdiction. I know the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council that approves the state's registered apprenticeships is already kind of looking at what they can do to kind of address 3.5 here. So I did just kind of want to acknowledge some of that context and stuff. Some questions on that have come up in recent conversations.
Thank you, Rachel. I think something else that's come up is around supporting our students with disabilities and other special populations. And so that's also referenced kind of in 3.1A. And I know one of the career coaches talked about how they maybe spend some additional time in the classrooms with students. And so this is an opportunity for us to also dig into a little bit more. What does it look like to provide wraparound services and supports and differentiated services and supports for all of our students to make sure that everyone's getting access to career connected learning.
And with that kind of highlighting, there's a difference before you start maybe a registered apprenticeship, and then also there's the support needed when you're in the registered apprenticeship and sort of, how to go to the workplace and so forth. And so again, just thinking through the nuances of all the students that will be participating.
Yes, and I have one thing to say. Can you go back to the previous slide? When we're looking at developing the plans for this, are we looking specifically at the school level? Because we see that the schools are working directly with them, or is it a real partnership where each of the entities are developing plans for the industry engagement?
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, 'cause I think that's one of the reasons why we met with various stakeholders, even the focus groups, right? So that we can get the perspective of the community college, get the perspective of the LEAs, get the perspective of the industry, business and industry, because the intention, as it is with this committee, is that all of those pieces are working together and in concert. So it's not just sitting on the shoulders of the LEA, but also in partnership and in collaboration with business partners, employers, as well as the community college.
Thank you.
So that brings us to priority number 4. So not only do we want CTE programs, we want them to be high quality, right? So how are we going to provide high quality CTE and other career preparation pathways, particularly those that support registered apprenticeship or other industry recognized credentials? We've already heard a lot today about industry recognized credentials, and Rachel kind of shared a little bit more about registered apprenticeship. And it's great to have our partners with Richard and MSCE. Because these strategies are really focused on how can we make sure that there's high quality program being offered in every jurisdiction in Maryland. And so the first thing to help do that is to evaluate the curriculum standards. What are the standards? What's being taught? How is being taught? And not only that, but is it relevant, right? Like, so as Richard was saying, like, we had some things on that list of IRCs that have been there for a while and maybe weren't as relevant to industry anymore. And so we want to make sure not only that we're evaluating the curriculum, but it's aligned to in-demand occupations and opportunities in our state. 4.2, we're also looking at how can we embed IRCs into every CTE pathway. As mentioned, right now, not every CTE pathway is going to have an IRC, but how can we work over time such that we can develop IRCs that are specific and endemic to that particular industry, like agriculture, like engineering? How can we make sure that every CTE pathway has an associated IRC along with it? I think it was great even as we toured the school today and we're able to hear that in some of our pathways, there's multiple opportunities. Some students are getting 3 IRCs or 4 IRCs participating in one program. So there has to be a way, and there is a way for us to make sure that every CTE pathway has at least an IRC connected to it. And then how can we also leverage our CTE coursework to serve as some of the related instruction for registered apprenticeship. And so when you're taking part in a registered apprenticeship program, our CTE programs really should be the backbone and the base to be able to provide that related instruction for our registered apprenticeship opportunities. And we also want to make sure that we have a robust system of pathway approval. And so just as you heard today, what's the process for the IRCs? You know, what is going to be our similar process in collaboration with MSDE to make sure that there is a system and structures in place for career technical education programs of study to be approved and move forward in the local jurisdiction. And then I believe that brings us to number 4.5, which is making sure that we support our CTE instructors. You know, how are we making sure that we are recruiting effective teachers in our classes, particularly our CTE classes? How are we incentivizing those teachers? That came up quite a bit as you move from industry into the teaching profession, making sure that they're able to be paid at a rate that encourages them to leave their existing profession to into the world of teaching, as well as how do we provide them with ongoing professional development so that they can continue to grow and develop as educators. And so part of this work will be figuring all of that out. Like, how do we develop the strategies to effectively recruit, retain, and train our CTE instructors? Pause there before we go to 5. We might have to plant some questions.
Justin, you guys can get back to it.
I know this is a lot, and to be quite fair, like, I'm running through it pretty quick, kind of in the interest of time. And so the great thing is we will be having more time for further discussion. So as you,
This is the warm up.
this is the warm up. Yes, this is the warm up. So as you dig into it, please feel free to get back to the team with any additional comments or feedbacks or questions that you have. And that brings us to priority number 5. So not only do we want students to have high quality CTE, but we also want to imbue CTE, technical instruction, across our content areas, right? And so what does it look like? I think you were talking about a little bit already, Richard, around like, what does it look like to have, you know, math integrated or CTE integrated into a math course? What does it look like to have a construction math course or a math course related to the health professions or what have you? And so that CTE isn't siloed over here and the academic content is over there. And so all of the strategies here are trying to figure out how can we bridge the two together, both our career technical education and our academic content. And so one way for us to do that is to actually look at developing course equivalency policies. So what is that? What might that look like? And so how a nursing course perhaps could also count as a science credit, right? Or how a JRTC course could also count as a physical education credit. And there's systems and structures that we can go through to figure out what CTE courses might also count for your core content areas in terms of counting towards graduation. That also provides more flexibilities for students to do all the career connected learning that we want them to do, right? So if we want them to be able to get out into the workplace, we have to also create flexible schedules for them to be able to do that. And having these course equivalency policies will help to facilitate students being able to actually spend more time at work. 5.2 is providing training and professional development for educators, again, to align to do that work. And so even when we have, you know, content areas that teachers are working together, those learning opportunities are often the CTE teachers are over here and the math teachers are over here and the English teachers are over there. But how can we also provide them with professional development so that they can come together and to be able to better align technical instruction curriculum across the content areas and sequencing. 5.3 talks about how we're going to provide students with more opportunities to engage with CTE in advanced coursework. And I think we even heard it today very clearly in the CNA program where students were able to also take AP courses. They were able to take anatomy and physiology and organic chemistry. And so in addition to taking, right, Dr. Boyd? So like in addition to taking, you know, their nursing courses, they were also taking advanced coursework. And I think this will also help to further engage our CTE students in staying in the CTE program. And also as we talk about encouraging and speaking to our families and parents and communities about, CTE is also an opportunity for you to engage in advanced coursework. You don't need to leave CTE to get in advanced coursework. You can take advanced coursework while you're in a CTE program. And so that's the purpose of 5.3. And then 5.4, I think it's 5.5 here, is to also, how can we leverage our community college and university systems to provide related instruction? And so as we heard earlier today from the College of Southern Maryland and their collaboration with Charles County Public Schools, is how can we make sure that we're leveraging our community college system to also provide CTE programs and courses, in addition to leveraging our community colleges and our university system to offer related and technical instruction, related courses to register the apprenticeship and others. Well, how they
Yeah.
I have one question. Oh, no, it's go ahead.
Let me say this, I am just thrilled, just listening to you right now as you speak to the career, right? And the college readiness component. And now I can see the intersection of how these two are coming together and a child not having to choose one or the other. And it makes perfect sense of how it's melding together. And I think for a long time, people were at that crossroad of, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But now seeing that we have a roadmap, we have a level of guidance of what this is going to look like, we're now addressing the whole child, right? And at this point, we're providing equity at best for our children. Everyone will not receive the same thing, but they will receive what they need in order to be successful. So I am bursting at the seams right now because I'm excited just to hear this. And when you said organic chemistry, I don't know. Like being a chemistry and biology major, this is absolutely wonderful that they get a chance to see this in person, right? They see it live and it comes alive to them. So I don't have to do this. I have options now. I don't push them and or force them down this pathway, but now we're providing them with pathways as the blueprint designs. Okay, I'm good.
My question was, I can't tell if it's a priority 3 question or a priority 5 one, which is, I hate to say it, but whenever I think about CTE, the first thing that always comes to my mind is not enough peanut butter, too much bread, right? Like there's not enough that we invest, and I think some of these strategies for sure make sense, right? It's partly, if it's CTE isn't this thing over here that we have to over 5 hurdles to get into, but it's more incorporated with the general curriculum, like that will help leverage other kinds of resources. It'll also drive more students toward it. And I think something we saw today from the tour and asking the instructors, I know Senator Rosenberg brought this up frequently, is like, there are far more students who want to engage than we currently are funding in our existing system. So I don't know where that fits, and I think all students have access to this continuum, and all students will have access to it, but
That's a big part of how that we don't.
I still feel like the strategy on 3, I was trying to be like, well, we'll partner with people, we'll develop the continuum, but how will we make sure we have enough spots for the students who clearly want to do an actual CTE? Anyway.
Well,
so that is.
that when I talked about where I think we need to do some massaging on 4 and 5, it's exactly that. So when we talk about CTE programs of study, and when we say, well, not every CTE program of study is going to have an IRC, or I think you have to question that because it's a resourcing question. It's not that in an ideal world with unlimited resources, that would be fabulous, but we don't live there, we live here. And so the question is, how do we deploy the resources that we have? And resources is not just money, it's people and time and focus. How do we deploy that in programs of study that lead to the best outcomes, that lead to employment, that, I think we're gonna have to make some, there can be good, what does it mean for a program to be good? Maybe it feels good and maybe students have fun in it or they enjoy it. That doesn't necessarily mean that, we're gonna have to make some of those choices, I think.
I think it goes back a lot to instructors as well, and I know we've brought this up several times, but having instructors that have the level of credentials and expertise and experience to be able to successfully run these programs. Without that, we cannot run them. So, I mean, for instance, we've expanded, and because we've had so many students interested in the medical field, interested in engineering, we offer different pathways that are in each of the schools to keep and have teachers that are keeping up that level of intensity within those programs is a super challenge. And so that is exactly it. We want to offer it, that we have the students that want it, but then unless you keep your resources tight and to that level and caliber, you're not going to get the outcome and the experience for those students that they really want.
Yeah, and I think this is an important sort of thing to note here, is this is where the framework has the ability to stretch the system, right? And so when you went into classrooms today and you saw the limitations of enrollment
Every
possibilities,
single CTE.
every one of
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
So those limitations are in the existing model, right? So kids come to this building, they sit in this box, they have that instructor, and we can only serve X number of kids here, right? And so I think as part of this strategy, an important thing to remember is this entire county, Charles County, has a number of resources, some of which are this box, right? There's a community college system, right? There are employers, doctors' offices, places where a student can go into work-based learning, including an apprenticeship, right? And so the old model is all of the instruction happens here and then students go do a thing, right? The stretch point is not all of the instruction has to happen here.
Yeah,
The way that you grow capacity is you think beyond this box,
right.
right? And that, I think, is what needs to be sort of the centering thing here, because it does require that level of collaboration that doesn't exist only here.
Right, and this is all making me think that, you know, some of the points about teachers and supporting them better, recruiting them, some of those points that were made under one of the other priorities. This piece you just spoke to, Richard, which was in one of the strategies around instruction happening elsewhere. So there's training happening elsewhere, the experience happening elsewhere. It's clear that it's kind of getting lost in the current kind of where it's situated here, the framework currently, and really needs to be drawn out more. So I think that's a really already great point of view for this team to take back.
And just something we need to remember all that's like, it's so easy to focus on the constraints of where you're currently sitting instead of like, wait, we can actually blow that up. You know, we don't have to sit in these same constraints. We can think creatively about how to solve the problem with different.
Great conversation, all right.
So that would work.
Because you've given us some food for thought, we have to go back and make some revisions, like how do we pull this out, this theme out more centrally, right? I mean, I think Richard, you made a great point, like all instruction doesn't have to happen in the schoolhouse. And the College of Southern Maryland being here earlier, I think is a great example of that. What does it look like to leverage our community colleges as other places of instruction? What does it look like to leverage our business partners as other places of instruction? How can we expand the capacity, right? Because you can only, this box can only hold 20 students. And the ratio, you know, like, so what can we do to provide more options and more opportunities? And this is one way to do it, but there are other ways to do it as well. And so we'll certainly take that back and think through how we can incorporate that more clearly and more pointedly in the framework. Our last priority is number 6. And it's making sure that, why do we do this to begin with? We're just making sure that all of our CTE and career preparation pathways are aligned with industry needs. And so 6.1, our pathways need to align with local workforce demands. Point in the story, right? Like if it doesn't align with what our employers need, then this isn't an appropriate program. And so that's 6.1 is making sure that anything that we develop is really aligned to our state and our local workforce demand. And as Richard mentioned earlier, a lot of our jurisdictions are using the LMI data to do that, as a labor market information data. And so, you know, that's the basis in the framework for the work. Under 6.2, we're going to identify regional and state partnerships. And the reason for that is this is not just a local responsibility or a local jurisdiction responsibility, right? As you can see from those who are around the table as well as online, right? So we've got the, you know, Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, the Maryland State Department of Education, like, what are some of the strategies and what are some of the partnerships that can be developed at the state level that can be provided and connected to the local jurisdictions? And so another strategy is to not only look at each jurisdiction kind of creating their own strategies and their own partnerships, but how can we also create some more regional and state level collaborations as well? Point number 3 is that we want to make sure that the programs are developed based on, again, local market data. And then under 6.4, we're going to use that data. We're not just going to collect it, but we're actually going to use it in order to make data informed decisions. And then ultimately under 6.5, we are going to define what those mechanisms are for collaboration. And so I think it came up, Dr. Boyd, as you mentioned earlier, who's responsible, who's doing this work. And so we need to be more clear and develop more guidance around what the roles and responsibilities are of the LEAs, of impact, of the State Department of Education, of the CTE Committee, of Labor, et cetera. And so that's going to take some work. And so that's good to hear as well. This is the vision statement, as Myra shared earlier. And then after this vision setting of the CTE framework, then we'll be moving to the next phase, which is the implementation. But for today, we wanted to get your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, your ideas on how the vision of the CTE framework for the state.
I'll go ahead and jump in there. The last one was so disappointing. Probably should be over here nodding a lot, but in the space of making sure we align with the industry needs probably is most important. And I got through the document, it's great, it touches all the spaces. That's why there's not a lot of questions right now. Because it is all moving in the right direction. But in order, we really take a look at state as a secretary, when I go through this all the time. Our state, in a big way to keep us competitive and where we are for us to continue to grow in the big picture. That's extremely important. And the pieces that I'm always listening and thinking about, process has to be really clear, really robust, and really flexible. And I think we're all aligned to get to all 3 of those spaces. We spend a lot of time really seeing a lot of small businesses, a lot of medium-sized businesses, even some big fish that we're going to get. And I walk to their offices and they're in need of good clay. They're in need of stickiness. And this process has to get sticky and make sure for it to be really productive for us across the state. I think all the ingredients are there. We were on the tour and I asked like I said, how have the corporate relationships been with the high school specifically? She said it's gotten better over the last 3 or 4 years. It has to be that way across the state with our stakeholders for what we do. So I think everything's aligned right now, but as we get our industry spaces, and I think as a state, we're going to start to point our finger in a couple ways to say, the governor says at times, we never realize that we're going to have to put a flag in the ground about what are we famous for and who we are and who are we from an industry perspective and what's Maryland's going to be famous for. It's going to be a direct relationship with what we produce and blueprint, kind of the character of our state and things that we train our workforce for. Secretary Williams, we say it all the time. I think the first state that figures it out and figures it out well, that means it really creates a really clear pipeline is going to be the most competitive one to be able to attract and be able to build small businesses to get across all of the areas and ag for what we have to do. So there's some quick feedback about, even if we came to the last one because, he's pulled in 1,000 directions every business we come to. We have to address those same questions. But that's just some quick feedback from
I appreciate that.
few minutes of silence to some feedback and comment for you.
No, that's extremely helpful. How do we make it sticky, right? Like these are aspirations and goals, but how do we actually feel it when you go into those businesses? And when you go into small businesses and large businesses, are you seeing it? Are you feeling it in action throughout the state?
Sorry, as I'm looking at it again, I think this issue of the career connected learning, actually, even though I understand the reason for that broader term, maybe as you all go back and look at priority 3 in particular, it's the issue I was raising before about, in priority 1, we say maximize the number of students who hit CCR, right? Which is like make it a hard number thing. I worry that 3 is a little bit, it's like, you'll access a continuum
Yeah.
of learning and exposure.
Mhm.
And we definitely want all students to have that learning,
Right.
exposure, but we actually want to move as many students as possible who want to into actually having the learning experience, like getting in the actual coursework and the programs, and I felt like maybe there's something more explicit that could be said on that front. I think it's good to have the broader exposure, but we can't ignore the direct enrollment issue.
Okay.
And I, totally take your point, Richard, it's maybe doesn't always look like the exact model you have here, we have to leverage those other tools, and that's great, honestly, that scratches itches for parents to like, oh, my kid's doing a college course too, but we have to make sure that it is that, career oriented learning, sorry, I'm not gonna get the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actual experience learning.
That's stronger.
Yeah. And something I'll just touch on, with the industry partnership, the kind of industry alignment piece. I think that's something that's really great about having this framework and this committee kind of part of the governor's workforce development board. And for some of the executive committee members, this may be a little repetitive from our last executive committee meeting, but as members at our March meeting will be aware, the board is in the process of establishing a couple of new committees, including one to focus on industry partnerships. And there's going to be some necessary intersections there as at a state level, we think about sort of aligning around those priority emerging sectors, those things we're really going to lean into, aligning them with workforce skill needs. How do these pipelines from the blueprint play into that? I think we're going to really want to be connecting the dots there in a very intentional way. There's a great opportunity for that work to yield really tangible regional industry partnerships among employers, including smaller employers, to help them build the capacity to engage. Because that's something else we heard is a capacity constraint today is in some industries, some of the local employers in the region, especially smaller ones, maybe have a hard time bringing on or knowing how to bring on and support a student, and how can we kind of support an employer kind of getting ready for that experience. So I think there's a lot of great connection points there too. I just wanted to point out.
That's good. All right, next slide. So thank you all for this really rich discussion, and I would just encourage you all, we're gonna go and make edits as a result of this discussion. But also as you're thinking about this and you drive home later tomorrow, take another read, feel free to send me a picture of your red line version like I'm doing here. And continue to send in your edits or thoughts. And so we'll update this and then share it all with you all. And then as Myra touched on, also share it with AIB as well to get their continued feedback. We have shared this preliminary, but continue to work with them for their input. And then, really once this is updated and, eventually later in the summer, potentially approved, it's really about, to everyone's point, how you actually implement and operationalize this and really develop very clear guidance, at next steps on that. And then
for a bunch of extra homework for.
Exactly, we need something to do next year, guys, so, so it's really exciting, just really thank you all for your feedback and discussion, and, yeah, if that's it, then I think we can move on, unless anyone's got. And I know there's a couple members who have time restraints, so I know, we've got a couple other things on the agenda, and we'll just try to move through as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and I
on the
think
updates.
what we'll do, Richard, this part's not too long, so it's pretty.
I'm gonna go real fast on this.
Because what I'd like to do is, if you wanna spend a couple minutes there, and then Rebecca, I'd like to go right to you, we can save the updates for after, because we definitely wanna hear, about all the good things that are happening. So.
All right, so next slide, please. A couple of themes. I wanted to just share an overview of Perkins from a programmatic and funding perspective for you, and then also there is a one printout that you have in one page. I sent it in color.
Oh, got the color version, but I remember that, but I need to print it, okay?
So just a quick refresher, just about high quality CTE systems, and this will have a lot of overlap with the framework that Latifa just walked us through. High quality CTE system includes academic and technical content, so blending of your academics and your technical components, multiple entry and exit points, knowing that students sometimes start something and then recognize, like we all do, it's really not for them. So we want to give them opportunities to sort of find that place where they belong. CTE should be designed to do that. It's aligned with needs of industries within the economy, prepare students for further education. all with the intent of moving them into high skill, high wage, in demand positions, right? So some of you have heard me often say, career is the destination. Military, college, apprenticeship, all of these things are various pathways to get to that destination, right? And so CTE becomes sort of that place where all of those things can be. Yes, ma'am.
So just a point of clarification, so, because we just walked through like a CT framework for Maryland, this slide, high quality, some of it looks similar but different wording, some of it might be a little different.
Yeah.
This is in Perkins. so
This
it's
is how the federal government calls it, right?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Work-based learning or applied learning or career-connected learning, or, you know, one of the other ways that it has been described in the previous framework. Coordination between secondary and post-secondary, we do this through articulation agreements, which is usually how credit is given with the community college system. Or even dual enrollment, which is really what we're leaning towards, because dual credit is transportable because it's transcripted. So it really becomes a better type of credit for students, and then offers a number of career exploration and awareness activities that begin as early as the 5th grade. So we've been focusing a lot on high school kids. Perkins really does begin in 5th grade and move all the way through post-secondary education in an associate's degree bearing program, right? So it really is that broad swath of the system. There is a specific call out within Perkins, and you also see the specific call out within the blueprint, where we need to make sure that we are fully resourcing and providing opportunities for all students, including those that are historically underserved. And so these are the 9 particular areas that are called out within Perkins that must be prioritized when thinking about how we are developing, supporting, resourcing the entirety of the system. Okay, next slide, please. And so in order to do that, Perkins has gone through a number of iterations over the last, I don't know, nearly 100 years, right? And really designs both a programmatic element, so how we support and teach kids, and also a funding element. So how are we funding those programmatic priorities? And so the purpose of Perkins is to create a federal avenue of sustainable funding for states all around the country to implement their career awareness and career connected learning programs. First authorized way back when, we wrote a state plan as a state in 2018. That was when the newest iteration of Perkins happened. We call it Perkins 5, 5th iteration. And as part of that state plan, we started moving the system a little bit towards, you know, really creating strong connections between industry, education, and all of the players in this space. Then came Blueprint, right, which really became that transformational game changer. So we're in the process over the next, you know, months of developing a new state plan that really incorporates this high quality framework that you all are considering and will eventually vote on, hopefully pass, right? That will then roll into the state plan, including things like how we're supporting our special populations, our industry recognized credentials and work-based learning elements. A lot of the work that you all are deciding over the next few months, and including today, impact what that next 4-year state plan looks like. And so as part of that state plan, we then fund those priorities. Nationwide, 1.4 billion is what's allocated to states annually. When you look at the last 20 years and figure in inflation, this is one of the few educational programs that's actually funded at roughly 40% less today than it was in the 80s. And so it's not kept pace with inflation. Additionally, with Perkins 5, it represents an opportunity to expand possibilities for every student to explore, choose, and follow CTE programs of study, and then earn also credentials of value. There are 9 required uses of Perkins, and these are called out specifically within the federal legislation. And it's sort of like if you have kids, when you send your kids to the store with a $20 bill, like you give them a shopping list, like you expect them to come back with the things on that list, right? They don't, well, you know how that goes, right? This is the federal government's shopping list for the money that they give us, right? Essentially strengthening the academic and career and technical skills of students participating in CTE programs, including the integration of academics within CTE programs. So that merging of the theory and the concepts. Linking CTE at the secondary and post-secondary level, providing students with strong experiences in understanding of all aspects of industry. So you see this in some of those foundational classes that are taught, some of them in 9th grade, some of them even before that, in middle school. And then developing, improving, and expanding the use of technology broadly defined here, right? So making sure that students have access to the equipment, tools of the trade within each particular industry, right? Wrenches can be technology, right? Next slide. Professional development programs to ensure that teachers, faculty, administrators, career and guidance counselors, they call them academic counselors, we call them school counselors, right? Are involved in integrating all aspects of CTE. This is all around making sure that students are well advised into whatever pathway they want to go into. Developing and implementing evaluations of the CTE program. We just ran through a comprehensive local needs assessment. 24 of our LEAs are potentially scarred through this process. I have no idea. Hopefully it's been good for them. But they evaluate programs every 2 years. Modernizing their CTE programs, including technology, making sure that they are sufficient size, scope, and quality. And so we provide very clear definitions of what this is in our state plan. Happy to share that. Definitions are very long. And then last, preparing special populations, including single parents, displaced homemakers, for movement into high school, high wage, or in-demand fields. So want to be very clear, this is in the federal statute, in ways that we have to prioritize the money that is being spent. Next slide, please. So this is what Maryland gets out of that $1.4 billion. This year, the planning amount that we received from the US Department of Ed about a month ago is $20.8 million. This slide really is sort of an overview. The printout that you have is more detailed for the different areas where the money has to be spent. Essentially, there are 3 broad categories. Local funds, this is the money that goes directly to LEAs and community colleges. So this is a pass-through grant. Nearly $18 million of the 20.8 is pass-through. So federal formula that looks at the total number of students ages 5 through 18 within the geographic boundaries of a school system. And then looks at the number of that student, that overall population that meets free and reduced meal criteria, right? So the way that you earn more Perkins dollars is everyone else in the state remains the same and you become less affluent, right? We evaluate that funding model every 10 years and it's based on census data. State leadership dollars are retained by MSDE. This is capped at 10% of the total awards, that's 2.08 million. This is what drives statewide initiatives. So statewide professional learning, statewide data systems, statewide salaries to support all of our LEA folks. This year, we also allocated a chunk of that state leadership money to 14 LEAs across the state that historically have been underfunded. So 14 LEAs within the state were funded between $31,000 a year all the way up to just shy of $200,000 a year, which is an absurd amount of money when you're trying to do this work, with career connected education. So my team, MSD, made a decision that we were going to create a funding floor of $250,000. So all 14 of those LEAs now have that floor of $250K in order to implement priorities federally and within the state. And so it's a game changer, right? The variance between funding, largest county in our state receives $1.9 million a year through Perkins. The lowest amount is $31,000. So a lot of variance in between there.
And just to make sure I'm following this piece correctly, that's a new piece this year in the budget that's in front of us here.
It is a new piece this year.
For the state to be able to kind of balance
Yeah.
where you feel the feds kind of underfunded.
Yeah, based on the
Well,
federal formula, completely underfunded areas of our state. And so as part of the work that my team has done, we looked at resource allocations across the state And then also opportunities to students, so the opportunity to participate in a CTE program. And so through that mapping across the state, we were able to identify areas that were high need, low funding. And as we're pushing out a number of these priorities, we want to make sure that they have solid funding in order to make, the magic happen on the ground, right? State leadership is one that MSD has, it generally has funded. There's a number of things that this has funded, right? And so convenings of bringing folks together, to, adopt new policies. Some of it is professional development. Some of it has been tied up in staffing positions, which I no longer have. And so it made a whole lot of sense to push this money back to LEAs, who would be able to use the money a little bit, better. It's closer to kids, right? Than what we would be able to do. So I feel like it's a good investment. And then last is the state administration area. So this is the portion that we use to administer the Perkins grant. It's 5% from the federal grant, and then MSDE as the eligible agency or the entity also has to provide 5%. So this is a local match made with state dollars, non-federal source. So MSD provides, 1.04 million to have the pleasure of getting the grant, and then the additional 1.04 goes into that administration element. Next slide. All right, so on this paper, I just want to run through this really fast. This is ultimately the budget that we would submit to the US Department of Ed. It runs one fiscal year, so July 1 through June 30 of 25. That's a federal fiscal year. This entire sheet is completely formula driven, right? And so our total allocation, 20.8 million, state leadership, state admin, you see the percentages there of what's required. Those cannot change. Those are in statute and they are solid. Within state leadership, there are a couple of specific callouts that we also have to fund. For example, 2% of the overall award must be provided to individuals and state institutions. So our correctional programs that are managed by Secretary Wu and Department of Labor, we provide to them and also to our juvenile justice facilities right around $416,000. That is a federal funding requirement. It cannot change. Non-traditional training and employment is set at a floor of $60,000. It can go up to whatever level you want it to go up to, but the floor is 60,000. For this particular element, one of the tasks of my team is to do Office of Civil Rights visits on behalf of the US Department of Education. We call those methods of administration, MOA visits. We just completed 6 of them over the last 2 months. But this is where we look at the entirety of the school to make sure that students have equitable access to all of their academic programs. We look at course calendars, we look at, course guides, we interview parents, students, teachers, whole gamut, count the number of handicapped spots out front. It's all inclusive for access and equity. That $60,000 partially funds the coordinator that does that work on behalf of the state of Maryland. The local formula distribution, 17.6, this is pass-through funding. It goes directly to LEAs. One component of that is the reserve fund. The reserve fund is sort of this extra pot of money that the state can use to pull aside in order to fund state priorities. It can run from 5% all the way to 15%. Maryland historically has funded this at only 5%. This is the money that we use for our CTE reserve grant. It was completely rewritten a year ago to support a number of the elements of Blueprint, including building in structures and supports around connecting students with apprenticeships. And so that will remain unchanged moving forward. Ideally, how I would like for this to go is a year from now, put this money in the hands of this committee to develop a CTE committee MSDE reserve grant that you all can use when you have these priorities, when you have the framework, when you have a clear, distinct vision of what you want to support around the state, then we can work collaboratively on this so that this becomes a way to fully fund and operationalize the work that this committee is doing. So too tight of a turn to do that right now, but certainly over the next year, that's really where I envision seeing this go, because this really is the pot of money that we do have a little bit more discretion on. And I want to make sure that we're able to use that fully. And then the other components, it breaks down how much secondary, so LEAs get and community colleges get. Close to 11 million goes to LEAs, close to 6 million goes to our community college system. Community colleges are funded a little bit differently. We look at their Pell Grant recipients within CTE programs, so we'll audit those numbers every year. And based on the distribution of Pell Grants, we'll allocate the money in that way. There are 2 community college systems that do not participate in Perkins. One, because they don't meet the threshold of required Pell Grant recipients. And the other chose not to participate in Perkins years ago, and has not come back around. So there are probably 100 better ways to more equitably fund community college systems beyond Pell Grant recipients. And so over the next year, we're working with Department of Ed to redefine how we should allocate those dollars so that we can get, the dollars, better allocated for our post-secondary system. All right, that was a lot. Questions?
Okay. And I think for the committee, we wanted to kind of have Richard talk about this, connections to blueprints and potential plans for future additional connections with our work as a committee. This is not a voting item for the committee, but for our MOU with MSD on Perkins, want to make sure this information is provided and have access to Richard for any questions. We'll get to dig into a lot more as we develop the next 4-year plan.
If I can add one additional piece to that, we are in the throes of local application development. LEAs
Their local application to this funding.
to receive this funding, right? So the way that this works, every 2 years, LEAs and community colleges have to do a comprehensive local needs assessment. Those details are fleshed out in federal legislation. We create a process for them to do it and then send them off into the world to do those things. Those needs assessments began January-ish, and so they've had a little bit of a runway to get those done. The next step is connecting the local application to the items that were sort of uncovered through the data, through conversations with stakeholders like local workforce boards and others, to then fund the next year's priorities. Those local applications, we've already received 2 of them. Those will generally trickle in over, middle of May to the middle of June. So we would invite any committee member that would like to participate in the process of scoring those applications. Like, we would be more than happy to norm with you, and then, you can work with MSD, my team, to score those applications. So, that's a really great way to really get involved in the work and to see what certain LEAs are doing, to be able to provide feedback on those programs. It's a good way to see your work operationalized. So if you would like to do that, email Rachel, Molly, me, anyone.
What would be the date that you would want to hear? 'Cause I know you guys are gonna be starting a review soon.
Yeah, so I would say if you are interested in that process, let me know sooner rather than later. It is a rolling approval process. So as they come in, we're trying to turn those around and get them back out the door with all of our feedback so that they have time to get it. Ultimately, I need to be able to provide an award by July 1st, which is a Monday. Ideally, we would need those awards to happen the Friday before, which I think like June 20th. So if you want to do this, let's go, shoot me an email, and we'll get you involved in the process.
Anticipating one more question, for our cabinet members, and tracks all members, would you be willing or interested in having designees, maybe relevant subject matter experts from their departments doing this on their behalf, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a designee that you would, prefer to do that, I would encourage actual members of the committee to do it, just because this is where you really see the rubber meeting the road. And I think it can be a valuable tool, you know, moving forward as we're thinking about next steps. So, yeah.
And since Michael Thomas is joining by phone, he did just text a question, if you could touch on. Can you discuss Perkins and college non-credit programs, workforce? As we talked about, I believe these programs are eligible for funding this year.
Yeah, I'm not gonna make eye contact at all with Rachel on this because. So way back in the day, Michael will remember this, there was something called Tech Ed, which is where Perkins dollars could be used to fund sort of post-secondary experiences, right? And then there was this sort of shift that happened where Perkins said, all right, we are going to fund grades 5 through 12 and the degree-bearing post-secondary programs, right? The guidance at that time was we now have WIOA funding, which really should be funding those like American Job Centers, rapid training programs, non-degree programs, like those sort of things through, you know, community college or other type systems. And so, you know, the short answer is on this, Rachel and I probably need to get together and work through some details on how that system can be, you know, super cohesive. And then, you know, figure out the funding mechanisms moving forward. I mean, here's the thing at the end of the day, right? You can use Perkins, you know, to fund non-credit programs, I suppose, if you wanted to, like, we could make that case. But what that then does is it dilutes an already small amount of money that hasn't kept up with inflation, right? Knowing that there are other funding sources that were designed to do this, right? Sorry, not sorry.
Okay, I'm mindful that we're over time. I really was looking forward to hearing from Rebecca, and I'm certainly able to stay for anyone who wants to stay and hear a little bit about what Charles County Public Schools is doing. I also understand that folks may have some commitments. But Rebecca.
Those of you who've been here, I mean, you've already found a lot about Charles County too, so no offense.
I am gonna have to, but I have been looking forward to hearing an update for you, so I'll stay for a few minutes.
All right, so welcome to Charles County. So just to give a little bit of an overview of who we are, we have overall enrollment of 27,000, a little over. So we're one of the middle-sized counties in Charles County, Maryland. We have 38 schools and 6 educational centers. So 22 elementary, 1 being built currently, 9 middle schools, with our first charter school being one of those middle schools this past year, and 7 high schools, North Point being one of those 7. You go to the next slide. So for Charles County, we're looking at about 43% of our population have an associate's degree or higher, 94% high school degree or higher. Just to give a kind of an overview, and you did, Dr. Wilson spoke with us earlier. So College of Southern Maryland, CSM is our partner here. Slide is our labor force. So we have 93,000 in our labor force. Our unemployment rates are around 2.8%. Our biggest employers here in Charles County goes back and forth between Naval Surface Warfare Center and Charles County Public Schools. So those are our biggest contenders here. And if you go to the next slide, and this is something that we talk a lot about here, is we have around 70% of our businesses are small. So we have, you know, they have 1 to 4 employees, which, so we talk a lot about apprenticeships. And so you have to keep that in mind when you've got these small businesses. And that's a big barrier. It not only is hard for those small businesses to manage that and truthfully mentor and things like that. But it's also capacity for us as a school system to manage that many partnerships too, because it's not like we have one partner that you're then going to able to send like this huge number of students to, or make all of these connections. So it takes a lot more legwork, and also capacity on both sides that this does impact. But again, it's a beautiful picture of Charles County where we are very individualized and small business oriented, and it's a very home feel for a county. All right, so next slide, this gives an overview of all, a very small overview, you can barely see it, but all our CTE pathways. So we have 33 overall, and they are in all 12 career clusters. And if you go ahead to the next slide, we'll talk about the access that we've tried to provide there. So we talked a lot, so we're at North Point today, and these students that are in these programs, they apply in 8th grade. So they make that decision very early, and they will go to this school for their 4 years. They'll be a part of their CTE program. They make that decision, they're in it. We know that that is not the only time. We also know that every kid that applies to these programs doesn't get in. So we have more students interested. So we really did want to look at how do we create more access as these students also are developing, how do we differentiate and allow for different entry points as they change as growing young individuals. So there are programs in each of the zone high schools that students do not need an application. They sign up through course selection. We've done a lot of work with our career school counselors and career advisors to identify students that might be very interested in that. And really make sure that we're getting them toward that. And those can start in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and things like that. So there's different entry points that students can access those. And they're everything from, we have biomedical science and engineering, computer science, business, the ProStart food and beverage management. So we did try to make sure that several of those different career clusters are accessible within their zone school. Another thing about Charles County that we really do find, and it always is different but per individual, but a lot of students have gone to school with the same group of students and kids since they were little babies, and they don't want to leave their zone high school. So I can use the example of my own son, who really would have done very well getting into construction design and management, but he would not leave his own school. So he applied and then did really poorly on the interest survey, so that he was hoping he wouldn't get it. So but there's a lot, we just know that that's our atmosphere. So then we also have this other pocket where our students can apply. In 10th grade, they've gotten a little older. Maybe they did apply and didn't get in originally, or maybe they just kind of gotten to know themselves a little more and realize what they want. And you see a big difference between 8th and 10th grade. So there's, and this is the student, they stay at their zone school for a portion of the day, and then they'll go to the technical center, Robert G. Seaton Educational Center, for a portion of the day. And so we do have 7 programs that are available there. So overall, to give you the big picture, enrollment, the bottom percentage is the most accurate. So that 48% of our students are enrolled in CTE programs. Up top, you can see we've got this 6,188 students. That has doubled. So like if they're taking more than one course, and you can see that, we have 19% that are taking more than one CTE course in a school year. And you can see also our completer stats, we have 38% of our senior class that completed a CTE pathway. So we're hitting a large percentage, pretty good. Still room to grow, of course, and obviously there's still room where kids want things that they're not able to have. And that's just by career cluster. I'm going to go ahead. Okay, so North Point, I've talked a little bit about this. We've been here all day, so welcome. It's a little different here at North Point because it is a comprehensive high school. So there is around 1,900 students that are enrolled here, and 60% of those students are in a CTE program. So they fill an application, they can be anywhere in Charles County, and they're bused here to attend. And then, but there is still that 40% that are zone students. So it really is a different kind of feel in that way. You can go to the next slide. We've got the demographics of North Point, which is pretty comparable to those 4 across Charles County as well. All right, so the big thing that I did want to kind of go through with you all today is to show kind of the impact of blueprint and what it really looks like in Charles County. So we've talked a little bit also today about our career counseling, and I just wanted to talk about, I love that you all are talking about that framework and creating more guidance. I think that's really exciting, and it gives a little bit more zest to the things that we're already passionate about and that we're seeing with our students. So that's really, really exciting and the perfect next step. We really are working hard to get these individualized student strengths and interests. And we do push it early because students are making these decisions early. And the more they know themselves and who they are and the things that are already piquing their interest, the more successful they're going to be in these programs that they're enrolling in. So we really want to have them know the opportunities that are there and also know themselves. So that's why that middle school work is just so important. And it's not just CTE. I know that our career coaches were really talking CTE. We are talking also all about our early college and our AP pathway that's in development as well. So that, and that's mostly focused at our parents as well, because they need to know all of these different opportunities because they're different than when they were in school and they are new and it's a new language. So we're really even pushing that into our fifth graders. We want to get it down to those parents early so that when it's all infiltrating their email and they're getting all of these ideas, then they have a place for it and they understand how to navigate it. So we know that's the next step. It has to be the parents and administration and staff to understand how to embed and integrate this work. Zello is our online platform that we use in general to build this portfolio. It starts in elementary. We're talking about ways to have that as a concrete element in elementary school so that they can then come into middle school already with a bit of a portfolio to work from. And they, again, are already doing that self-exploration. So we're talking about ways to do that. And it does carry on with them. So I think what we're talking about now, getting into some of our logistics is we have Zello, then we have the student information system, and we've got Canvas, which is our, our online platform for curriculum and resources like that. How do we marry them? How do we get everything so that it's concrete and streamlined for our students and our families and our career advisors, coaches, everybody who needs to access and resource that information. So it doesn't just slip away. We need it to really streamline and carry on with our students. So they're building and adjusting and things like that as they move on. So we have, and I'm not going to go too much into the details, but just over 22,000 participants in career exploration at high school, 16,000 at middle school, 300 and some in elementary schools just this year. And the next slide we'll go into is, this is one of our shining glories. We started this about 4 years ago. And this is one of the ways that we have found most impactful to reach our middle school students and what is available in Charles County.
I think 7th and 8th grade students were given the opportunity to sign up for the Career and Technical Education, CTE Exploration Camp. Purpose being so they can explore the opportunities available in Charles County Public Schools. I signed up for the program because I had absolutely no clue what I was doing in high school. I always wanted to do a bunch of different things. So I thought coming here would help me figure out certain stuff out of it. But when you're at high school, you really don't know anything about the program unless you have an older sibling in the program or like your friends in the program. So this is a good way to get a grasp of what the programs are. I would like the experience to have last year because of the experience, but also a way that you can learn and have fun and help you figure out what you got in the future. So 3 different sessions of the camp. They were each 3 days long. Students were able to explore 9 different CTE pathways over the 3 days. They were able to choose 2 of those pathways, and the other 7 pathways are ones that they're randomly put into. students get to see exactly what the curriculum is in different programs and see what they're interested in, what they are really good at. And it does result in them making some better decisions when they're choosing their courses later on. Something that stuck out for me was business, because I really found that it was very fun being like an accountant, like managing money. I really enjoyed the educational career. We were in a study classroom and had to like teach kids how to be fun and fundamental. And I also really liked the coding room where we had to buy their using a bracelet and a 16 by 16 by drawing using sticky notes and the welding program. Amazing. It was so interesting seeing the fact that I was welding something, I was doing something dangerous safely. And we can do these things. And what I felt back and said, I like basic. Well, I have to make some cookies and I didn't have to pay for them. When somebody goes to this program and leave this camp wanting to learn more, that can result in them doing their own research with the resources that we have through our website and also that are available in each of the middle schools. So it can also lead to them realizing the vast number of opportunities there are. So that when they are deciding whether to sign up for certain courses, apply for certain programs, they are doing that based on their personal interest and their strengths. It's just a great opportunity to learn things about CTE programs. Instead of being taught about welding, you get to actually experience it firsthand and see, and you have an opportunity to actually use welding. I think it's really sharpens your mind to what you should do, because nobody wants to be in a situation where you don't know what job you want, or what situation you want to go through. So I think this is a good place to start.
Another great element is there's students that are supporting each program, so they're interns that help to teach them as well. So we do that each summer. And this summer we're adding in, because as we're evolving, we're having a field trip day to College of Southern Maryland. So they'll visit both campuses so they can learn about early college and they can learn about the programs there too. So we can try to, and it's called a career exploration instead of CTE. So we're going full compass so that everybody can learn about all of those opportunities. And so, yeah, the early college offerings, I know that Dr. Wilson spoke about these earlier. This is growing vastly here. We didn't have any of these in existence 2 years ago. So we really are growing and we're looking and we're evolving, and it's really exciting because just like Richard, you spoke about, we know that we cannot house everything within our walls. They have resources, we have resources. They're both in some capacities being underutilized, some being over. So it's really nice to see us trying to combine those and utilize them the best way possible for experiences for these kids. So next slide. And so this just talks more about the different things that we've really overcome. It's just little, like we didn't even have college courses coming back counting as graduation credits and things like that. So more and more, we've just really started to push, and it's because of this work. All right, and finally, we're going to end with some Apprenticeship Maryland. For Charles County, we have pushed, and like I've said, it's been tough for us to get partners. We've done a lot of work. Sandy, who's right back here, is our apprenticeship coordinator. She has built an understanding in our community of apprenticeship, and I think that that's obviously the first start. It was something that there was a, what are we talking about? No idea. So people do understand it now. We're getting more and more willing. We definitely still have barriers, but it's for the next slide. Eligible employers is a barrier because of some of the small sizes. I know we're also talking about some that being at home businesses and things like that, and young children. The other big thing is Naval Surface Warfare Center is our biggest employer. They deal with bombs. So like having 18, like there's a hard 18 with that. Like we're trying to figure that out. But that's something that they're working with their superiors to figure out what capacity, what can we do in that. So we're continuing to push, and we do have a smart workforce group that meets monthly to try to bridge that gap and figure that out, because that's our biggest entity that we need to figure out. Transportation, because we're very rural. And also having the capacity in the schools to manage the students and the employers. So that's something that we're working with our LEA to get that up and running. Let's have the work-based learning quarters, let's have it within each of the buildings. So Sammy doesn't have to run around after 12 of her students across the county. So that is that. So welcome to Charles County. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful overview. And with that, thank you all for sticking with us. We're adjourning the meeting. We will send out next steps via email. So you guys can get on the road. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Rebecca, congrats.